Victoria Crane had never imagined that the man she had just humiliated in front of the entire business class cabin would be the only person capable of saving her life in 2 hours. But life has its own way of teaching lessons to people like her. Sometimes those lessons come at 35,000 feet, with 200 souls hanging in the balance, and the fate of everyone resting in the hands of the very man she had deemed unworthy of sitting in the same section. This is that story. The 47th floor of Crane Technologies headquarters in Manhattan offered a view that most people would kill for. At 6 in the morning, the city sprawled beneath Victoria like a kingdom waiting to be conquered. She had been in her office since 5, reviewing the presentation that would determine the future of her company. The London meeting was everything. A $2 billion IPO that would cement her legacy as one of the most successful female entrepreneurs in American tech history. At 34, Victoria Crane had built her consulting firm from a studio apartment and a laptop into an empire employing 3,000 people across 4 continents. Magazine covers celebrated her. Business schools studied her. Fortune 500 CEOs sought her advice. Yet standing at that window, watching the city slowly wake up, she realized there was no one to call, no one to share this moment with, no one waiting for her to come home. On her desk sat a photograph, face down, her parents smiling, from a time before she learned that trust was a luxury she could not afford, before Daniel. 5 years ago, Daniel Porter had been everything, her business partner, her fiancé, her future. They had built their first company together, celebrated every milestone together, planned a life together, until the night she discovered he had manipulated her into signing documents that transferred controlling interest to him. She lost her company, her savings, and her ability to believe in anyone. She rebuilt from nothing. But this time, she constructed barriers instead of connections. She learned to assess people quickly, to identify threats before they could strike, to measure worth in visible metrics because invisible ones could be deceived. Her phone buzzed, a text from Richard Blackwell, her current business partner and chief operating officer. Safe travels. Everything is ready for London. She didn't notice the subtle wrongness in those words. Richard had opposed the IPO timeline from the beginning, arguing they should wait another year. His sudden enthusiasm should have been a warning sign, but Victoria was too focused on London to see what was happening in New York. Across the city, in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, Marcus Cole was already awake. The sun hadn't fully risen, but he had breakfast ready and luggage packed by the door. A pink unicorn backpack sat on top of a well-worn carry-on, looking wonderfully out of place next to his faded military jacket. The apartment was small but filled with evidence of love. Emma's drawings covered the refrigerator door. Model airplanes lined the windowsills, each one assembled during Sunday afternoon sessions that had become their sacred ritual. In a glass case near the television, military medals gathered dust beside a wedding photograph. Rachel smiled from that photograph. Even after 3 years, looking at her still felt like pressing on a bruise that would never fully fade. Marcus was 36 years old. He stood 6'2", his frame still carrying the disciplined muscle of his military years. His short brown hair was trimmed with the precision of someone who never quite abandoned old habits. His blue eyes, once trained to track enemy aircraft at 30,000 feet, now focused on simpler things: bedtime stories, school pickups, making sure his daughter never doubted she was loved. He had been one of the Air Force's elite, an F-22 Raptor pilot with the 22nd Fighter Squadron, 2,000 combat hours, commendations, a career that should have taken him to the stars. Then Rachel got sick. 18 months of treatment, chemotherapy, experimental therapies, hospitals that became a second home. And bills. God, the bills. $847,000 after insurance. He sold the house, cashed out his retirement, even pawned his medals, It wasn't enough to save her, but it was enough to empty everything he had. On her last night, Rachel had held his hand with what little strength remained. "Promise me," she whispered, "no more risks. Emma needs a father, not a hero. Give her a normal life, a safe life. Promise me, Marcus." He promised. 3 days later, she was gone. He left the Air Force, took a job as an aviation maintenance engineer. The pay was a fraction of what he could earn elsewhere, but it meant being home every night. It meant never missing a bedtime story. It meant honoring his word. "Daddy?" Emma stood in the doorway, 7 years old, her brown curls wild from sleep. She clutched her sketchbook, the one filled with drawings of aircraft, each labeled with technical details he had taught her. "I dreamed about Mommy," she said softly. "She said she's proud of you." Marcus knelt down, pulling her into his arms, hiding the tears that threatened to fall. "She's always watching us, sweetheart. Always." Today they were flying to London. Rachel's parents lived there now, and Emma deserved to know her grandparents. It had taken Marcus 2 years to save enough for business class tickets. He wanted Emma to experience something special, to feel like a princess for one day. He had no idea that this flight would demand everything he had sworn to leave behind. The business class cabin of Flight 789 glowed with soft amber light as passengers settled in. Crystal champagne flutes caught the afternoon sun streaming through oval windows. Executives in tailored suits opened laptops. A hedge fund manager discussed quarterly returns with an investment banker. The air smelled of leather and privilege. Victoria Crane sat in seat 2A, reviewing her presentation one final time. The weight of $2 billion pressed against her temples like a persistent ache. Then she heard the commotion. A man was struggling through the aisle, wrestling with an oversized carry-on while balancing a pink backpack decorated with unicorns. His broad shoulders barely fit in the narrow space as he tried to manage a child's safety seat with one hand and guide a little girl with the other. Victoria watched with barely concealed amusement. The man wore a faded jacket that looked at least a decade old. His jeans were generic. His sneakers were the kind sold at discount stores. Everything about him screamed that he didn't belong here. The little girl was adorable, she had to admit, brown curls bouncing as she pointed excitedly at the window, chattering about wing configurations and engine types with a vocabulary that seemed too advanced for her age. But adorable didn't excuse the obvious. This man had clearly saved for years, or cashed in every credit card point he'd ever earned, just to pretend he belonged in business class for a few hours. People like him made Victoria uncomfortable. They reminded her of vulnerability, of the version of herself she had worked so hard to bury. Her perfectly manicured fingers drummed against the armrest as she watched him fumble with the child's harness. The businessman across the aisle caught her eye and smirked. The investment banker behind her shook his head with theatrical disappointment. Victoria felt validated. She wasn't being cruel. She was simply observing reality. "Business class certainly isn't for everyone," she said, her voice carrying just enough volume to ensure neighboring passengers could hear. "Some people really should consider whether they can afford the lifestyle before purchasing tickets." Soft chuckles rippled through the nearby seats. Marcus heard every word. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. His hands paused on Emma's seatbelt for just a moment, but he didn't turn around. He didn't respond. Instead, he remembered Rachel's voice from that hospital bed. "Don't let anger steal your peace. Promise me." He had promised. "Daddy," Emma whispered, sensing the shift in atmosphere, even if she didn't understand it. "Why are those people laughing?" Marcus knelt beside her seat, his voice gentle and steady, the same tone he used when explaining why Mommy couldn't come back from heaven. "Don't worry about them, sweetheart. Some people need to make noise to feel important. We're exactly where we're supposed to be." Emma looked past her father toward Victoria, her young eyes holding a wisdom that didn't match her age. "Miss," she said innocently, "my mommy used to say you can't know someone's story just by looking at them. The outside doesn't show what's inside." Victoria froze. Something flickered in her chest, an unexpected twinge of discomfort, but she pushed it down, returning to her laptop with renewed focus. A child's opinion meant nothing. The plane pushed back from the gate with a subtle jolt. Marcus helped Emma find the safety card, turning the required demonstration into a game. She giggled when he made sound effects for the oxygen masks. Her laughter cut through the subdued atmosphere like sunlight through clouds. Several passengers smiled despite themselves. Even the hedge fund manager paused his calculations to watch. Victoria did not smile. She ordered champagne and buried herself in spreadsheets. As Flight 789 climbed through 10,000 feet, the seatbelt sign dimmed and the cabin crew began service. Marcus declined the offered champagne, requesting apple juice for Emma instead. Victoria noticed, another data point confirming her assessment. Outside the windows, the Atlantic Ocean stretched endlessly toward the horizon. 200 passengers settled in for the long journey ahead, each carrying their own stories, their own burdens, their own reasons for crossing an ocean. None of them knew that in 47 minutes, their lives would depend on the man in the faded jacket with the unicorn backpack. None of them knew that the line between life and death would be drawn by hands trained in combat, guided by a promise made to a dying wife, and witnessed by a 7-year-old girl who never stopped believing her daddy could do anything. The first indication of trouble came at 35,000 feet over the Atlantic Ocean. The plane shuddered. Not the gentle turbulence passengers barely notice, but a violent shake that sent drinks sliding across tray tables and caused overhead bins to rattle ominously. Victoria's champagne flute crashed to the floor, shattering into crystal fragments that scattered like frozen tears across the carpet. The lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then a peculiar burning smell began to permeate the cabin, sharp and acrid, like overheated electrical components. In the cockpit, Captain Robert Walsh had 25 years of experience, telling him something was very wrong. Warning lights illuminated in rapid succession, painting the dim space in reds and ambers. His first officer, David Chen, had been fighting nausea since lunch. The airport food court sushi had seemed like a good idea at the time. Now his face had gone from pale to ashen, sweat beading on his forehead as he struggled to focus on the instruments. "David, are you all right?" Captain Walsh asked, his tone shifting from professional to alarmed. Before David could respond, his body went rigid. Then he slumped forward against his harness, unconscious. His breathing became shallow and erratic. His skin took on a grayish pallor that sent alarm bells ringing in the captain's experienced mind. Severe food poisoning, maybe an allergic reaction. Either way, Captain Walsh was suddenly alone in a cockpit full of warning lights. The plane lurched again, this time accompanied by a sound no passenger ever wants to hear, the stuttering of an engine struggling to maintain power. Engine number 2 was overheating. Hydraulic pressure was fluctuating wildly. The electrical system was experiencing cascade failures. And directly ahead, storm clouds were building into dark towers that would test even a fully functional aircraft. Captain Walsh had handled emergencies before. Engine failures, electrical fires, medical crises, but never all at once, never alone. He triggered his radio, calling for the lead flight attendant while simultaneously fighting to maintain control of an aircraft that wanted to roll starboard. Then he did something he had never done in 25 years of flying. He reached for the intercom and asked for help. In the cabin, screams erupted as the plane dropped several hundred feet in seconds before stabilizing. Passengers gripped armrests with white knuckles. A woman in economy class began crying. Somewhere behind Victoria, someone was praying loudly in Spanish. Victoria felt fear, real fear, the kind that strips away pretense and leaves only truth. She thought about her empty penthouse, her awards, her magazine covers. She thought about the fact that if she died today, her obituary would list her achievements, but no one would genuinely mourn her. No one would miss her presence at family dinners, because she never attended any. No one would remember her laugh, because she rarely laughed anymore. Her hands trembled as she gripped her armrest. The presentation for London suddenly seemed absurd. $2 billion meant nothing at 35,000 feet with smoke in the air and terror in her throat. Then the captain's voice came through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are experiencing technical difficulties. I need to ask, is there any pilot on board? Any pilot with experience, military or civilian, please identify yourself to the cabin crew immediately." The silence that followed was deafening. Flight attendants moved through the aisles, their faces masks of professional composure even as their eyes betrayed their fear. Sophie Martinez, the lead attendant, scanned business class desperately. No one stood. No one raised their hand. The plane shuddered again, and Victoria heard herself whimper. She hated the sound, hated the weakness it represented. But she couldn't stop it. Marcus Cole sat very still. His daughter's hand was wrapped around his fingers, small and warm and trusting. She wasn't crying. She wasn't screaming. She was watching him with absolute faith in her eyes. "Daddy will fix it," she said quietly. "Daddy can fly anything." The words hit him like a physical blow. In his jacket pocket, hidden behind his driver's license, was his military ID. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Cole, 22nd Fighter Squadron, F-22 Raptor pilot. He had promised Rachel, no more risks, no more heroics. Emma needed a father, not a dead legend. But Emma was on this plane. And if he did nothing, if he stayed in his seat and kept his promise, there was a very real chance she would die anyway. The math was simple in the end. Keeping Emma safe meant acting now. Rachel would have wanted him to save their daughter, whatever it took. 3 heartbeats. That's how long the decision took. Then Marcus Cole stood up. The movement drew every eye in business class. The man with the faded jacket and the unicorn backpack. The man they had laughed at. The man they had dismissed. He pulled his military ID from his wallet and handed it to Sophie Martinez, who had appeared beside his seat as if summoned by his decision. Her eyes widened as she read the credentials. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. Emma's voice rang out clear and proud in the stunned silence. "That's my daddy. He flew the fastest planes in the whole Air Force. He can fly anything." Victoria stared at the man she had mocked. The faded jacket suddenly looked different. Military issue. The way he moved through the narrow aisle spoke of training and discipline, not awkwardness. The quiet dignity with which he had absorbed her insults wasn't weakness. It was a strength she couldn't begin to comprehend. She had made assumptions based on appearances alone, and she had been catastrophically wrong. Marcus entered the cockpit to find Captain Walsh fighting controls, while David Chen lay unconscious in his harness. The smell of burning electronics was stronger here, and through the windscreen, lightning split the darkness of an approaching storm. "Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Cole, retired Air Force," he announced, sliding into the jump seat. "F-22 Raptor pilot, 2,000 combat hours, another 1,000 in training and transport aircraft. Tell me what you need, Captain." Captain Walsh didn't waste time on verification. The crisis demanded immediate action. "First officer is down. We've lost partial hydraulics. Number 2 engine is running rough. And we're about to hit a storm system I can't navigate around with our current mechanical status. I need you to handle communications and systems management while I fly. Can you do that?" Marcus was already reaching for the spare headset, his hands moving across unfamiliar controls with the adaptive expertise that had made him one of the Air Force's best. "Copy that, Captain. Give me 30 seconds to familiarize myself with your panel layout. Then I'm your co-pilot. His fingers flew across the flight management system. His mind processed information at combat speed. Within moments, he was calling out readings, adjusting parameters, becoming the captain's second pair of hands. London Center, this is Flight 789 declaring emergency. We have partial system failures and are requesting immediate vectors to the nearest suitable airport. Approximately 200 souls on board, 4 hours of fuel remaining. The response came through his headset, professional voices guiding them towards Shannon Airport in Ireland, 90 minutes away under normal conditions. Nothing about this was normal. The storm hit them with the force of a giant's fist. Rain lashed against the windscreen with such intensity that forward visibility dropped to nearly zero. Lightning split the sky in brilliant, terrifying displays. The plane bucked like a wild horse trying to throw its riders. Marcus called out readings with military precision, his voice steady as a metronome, while chaos raged outside. Altitude holding at 33,000. Engine 2 temperature dropping but still in yellow range. Hydraulic pressure fluctuating between 40 and 60%. We need to start descent soon, Captain, or we risk complete hydraulic failure. Together they fought the storm. Two men who had never met, bound by crisis into a partnership that would determine whether 200 people lived or died. In the cabin, Emma Cole sat with remarkable composure. Her sketchbook was open to a drawing of an F-22, and she colored carefully, staying within the lines despite the plane's violent movements. An elderly woman beside her was crying, rosary beads clutched in trembling hands. Emma reached over and took her hand. "Don't be scared," she said softly. "My daddy is flying the plane now. He promised my mommy he would always keep me safe, and daddy keeps his promises." Victoria heard these words from 2 rows ahead. She thought about promises, about the ones made to her and broken, about the ones she had made to herself and kept at terrible cost. She thought about a 7-year-old girl whose faith was unshakable, whose trust was absolute, whose mother had died but whose father had stayed. Victoria Crane had everything the world said mattered: money, power, success. Emma Cole had something Victoria had lost so long ago she barely remembered what it felt like. She had someone who would never let her down. The descent through the storm tested every skill both men possessed. Captain Walsh flew with the intuition of 25 years while Marcus managed systems and communications with combat-honed precision. 500 feet to decision altitude, Marcus announced as they broke through the lower cloud layer. Approach the speed 150 knots, slightly high but within parameters given our hydraulic situation. Wind shear warning active. Recommend 10 degrees right correction. Shannon Airport appeared below them, runway lights gleaming in the Irish rain. Fire trucks and ambulances lined the tarmac, emergency lights flashing. The first landing attempt was textbook perfect until a severe crosswind gusted at exactly the wrong moment. The plane lurched sideways just before touchdown. The wheels touched, then skipped, and suddenly they were drifting toward the edge of the runway. "Go around," Marcus shouted. "Go around now!" Captain Walsh slammed the throttles forward. The engines roared back to full power. The plane climbed at an angle that pressed everyone back into their seats as they abandoned the approach and climbed back into the gray clouds. In the cabin, passengers screamed. Some vomited. Others simply went silent, faces gray with terror. Victoria found herself praying, actually praying, for the first time since she was a child. Not for her company, not for her IPO, just for one more chance. Emma's voice cut through the chaos, small but steady. "It's okay. Daddy won't give up. He never gives up." In the cockpit, Marcus was already calculating. "Fuel status?" "Enough for 2 more attempts," Captain Walsh replied grimly. "Hydraulic pressure?" "Down to 45% and falling." Marcus closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. In combat, he had learned to find stillness in chaos, to let training take over when conscious thought was too slow. He opened his eyes. Captain, I'm going to call out every parameter on final approach. You fly, I'll be your instruments. We're going to put this bird down smooth. Captain Walsh almost smiled. Copy that, Lieutenant Colonel. The second approach began. 3,000 feet, Marcus called. On glide slope, speed 145 knots. Hydraulic pressure holding at 45%. Wind correction applied. Center line tracking good. His voice became the rhythm by which Captain Walsh flew. Each call-out was a stepping stone toward safety. 2,000 feet, stable. Continue. 1,000 feet, approach criteria met. Runway in sight, 12 o'clock. 500 feet, approaching minimums. Wind check shows 15 knots from the right within limits. 300 feet, 200 feet, 100, 50, 30, 20. The main landing gear touched down hard enough to bounce once before settling. The nose wheel followed with a thump that sent relief flooding through 200 passengers. Reverse thrust roared as Captain Walsh fought to slow their momentum on the rain-slicked runway. Marcus called out decreasing speeds while monitoring brake temperatures. 100 knots, 80, 60, 40. They used nearly the entire runway length before coming to a stop. For one eternal moment, silence. Then the cabin erupted. Applause and tears and strangers embracing strangers. The shared trauma of near death creating instant bonds between people who would never have spoken otherwise. Victoria Crane sat frozen in her seat, tears streaming down her face, her designer dress soaked with spilled coffee, her carefully constructed life revealed as hollow at its core. She was alive, and she had no idea what to do with that. Captain Robert Walsh powered down the engines and turned to Marcus with a handshake that conveyed more than words ever could. You saved us all, Marcus. That was some of the finest flying I've ever been part of. The Air Force lost a hell of a pilot when you retired. Marcus removed the headset, exhaustion crashing over him as the adrenaline faded. Just did what needed doing, Captain. For my daughter. For everyone. As Marcus emerged from the cockpit, the business class cabin fell silent. The same passengers who had smirked at his struggles with luggage now looked at him with expressions of awe and gratitude. Several stood and applauded. Others simply nodded with respect, understanding that their earlier judgments had been catastrophically wrong. Emma launched herself into his arms the moment he reached their seats. Her small body shook with relief as she buried her face in his neck. I knew you'd save everyone, Daddy. I told them. I told them you could do anything. Marcus held her tight, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo, feeling her heart beat against his chest. This was why. This was always why. Mommy helped, he whispered. She was with us the whole time. Victoria Crane stood in the aisle, blocking his path. Her designer dress was wrinkled beyond repair. Her power bob had collapsed into something almost human. Her makeup had long since surrendered to tears and terror. But it was her eyes that had changed most. The calculating assessment was gone. What remained was simply a woman who had faced death and found herself wanting. Wait, she said, please. Marcus paused, Emma still in his arms. I owe you an apology. Victoria's voice broke on the words. No, more than that. I owe you my life. We all do. And I said terrible things. I made assumptions without knowing anything about you. She looked at Emma, at the absolute trust in the child's eyes when she looked at her father. Your daughter is lucky to have you. I spent years believing success meant accumulating power and wealth. But watching you walk into that cockpit, knowing you might not walk out, that's the kind of courage I've never had. Marcus studied her for a long moment. He had every right to condemn her, to publicly humiliate her as she had tried to humiliate him. But he thought about Rachel, about what she would do in this moment. Rachel, who had never met a stranger she couldn't turn into a friend. Rachel, who saw past sharp edges to the wounded hearts beneath. "We all carry weight that others can't see," he said simply. "The measure of a person isn't in never falling. It's in what they do when they get back up." Emma tugged on Victoria's sleeve, her young face serious. "Miss Victoria, do you want to have dinner with us? Daddy makes really good spaghetti, and we always have enough. That's what Mommy used to say. There's always room for one more friend at the table." Victoria stared at the child, at the simple, unconditional invitation, at the grace being offered by people she had wronged. I... She couldn't remember the last time someone had invited her anywhere just because they wanted her there. Not for her money, not for her connections, just for her. "There's a place near the airport hotel," Marcus said. "Nothing fancy, just good food and generous portions. You're welcome to join us." Victoria nodded, not trusting her voice. The restaurant was indeed nothing fancy. Fluorescent lights instead of chandeliers, paper napkins instead of cloth, menus with pictures of the food. But as the three of them sat in a worn vinyl booth, something shifted in the atmosphere. Victoria found herself laughing, actually laughing for the first time in years, as Emma explained why French fries needed to be the exact right thickness for optimal ketchup delivery, complete with diagrams drawn on her napkin. Marcus smiled, cutting Emma's chicken fingers into smaller pieces with practiced ease. "She wants to be an aerospace engineer, or a princess. She hasn't decided yet." "I can be both," Emma said confidently. "Princess engineers probably have the best airplanes." Victoria watched them interact. The casual intimacy of a father who knew exactly how his daughter liked her food. The way Emma reached for his hand without thinking. The silent communication of a family forged through loss. "Tell me about her," Victoria said quietly. "Your wife." Marcus was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft but steady. "Rachel was sunshine in human form. We met at an air show where she was selling handmade jewelry. I was in my flight suit, trying to look impressive. She told me I was too serious and needed someone to remind me that not everything required military precision." He smiled at the memory. "She was right. She always was. When Emma was born, Rachel said we had created the perfect flight plan. I would teach her to reach for the sky. Rachel would teach her to find joy in the journey." "What happened?" Victoria asked, then immediately regretted it. "I'm sorry, you don't have to." "Cancer," the word hung in the air. 18 months of treatment, $847,000 after insurance. I sold everything. The house, the cars, cashed out retirement, pawned my medals. Victoria felt something shift inside her. She had spent 5 years protecting herself from pain. But sitting across from this man who had lost everything and still radiated quiet strength, she realized that isolation doesn't protect, it just empties. "The last thing she asked of me," Marcus continued, "was to never put myself in danger again. Emma needed a father more than the world needed another hero," she said. "Give her a normal life, a safe life." He looked at Emma, who was focused on arranging her fries into an airplane shape. "I honored that request for 3 years. Until today." Until today, he met Victoria's eyes. But keeping Emma safe meant taking action. "Rachel would have wanted me to protect our daughter, whatever it took." Victoria thought about her own losses, the betrayal that had shaped her, the defenses she had built, the person she had become. 5 years ago, my fiancé stole my company. We built it together. I trusted him completely. Then one day I discovered he had manipulated me into signing documents that transferred control to him. I lost everything overnight. She had never told anyone this story. Not colleagues, not acquaintances, not therapists. But something about this moment made honesty feel necessary. I rebuilt from nothing, she continued, but I also rebuilt myself into someone who assesses quickly, who trusts cautiously, who measures people by external markers because internal ones can be fabricated. That's why you said those things on the plane. That's why I said those things. Victoria looked down at her hands. I was shielding myself from being hurt again, but I was really just inflicting hurt on others instead. Emma had been quietly coloring on her placemat, but now she looked up with those two wise eyes. Miss Victoria, do you know why airplanes can fly? Because of the engines. Emma shook her head seriously. No, Daddy says it's because of the wings. The wings are shaped so they lift the plane up. But they don't work alone. They need the air pushing back against them. She put down her crayon and looked at Victoria with 7-year-old solemnity. Mommy said people are like that too. We can't lift ourselves up all by ourselves. We need other people pushing back, holding us up, even when it's scary to let them. Victoria felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She didn't try to stop them. Your mommy was very wise. She was the wisest, Emma agreed. She said you can't hug yourself properly, so you need other people for the best hugs. She tilted her head thoughtfully. I think you need more hugs, Miss Victoria. Before Victoria could respond, her phone buzzed, then buzzed again, then began buzzing continuously. She glanced at the screen and her face went pale. What is it? Marcus asked. Richard. Her voice was hollow. My business partner. He's called an emergency board meeting while I'm gone. He's trying to take control of the company. The irony wasn't lost on her. 5 years ago, she had lost everything to a man she trusted. Now history was threatening to repeat itself. How much time do you have? The meeting is in 48 hours. If I'm not there, she trailed off. 8 years of work, 3,000 employees, everything she had rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal. Marcus leaned forward, his blue eyes steady. Then you have time. 48 hours is 48 hours. Assess the situation, identify your resources. Act decisively. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, but it's doable. You built this company from nothing once. You can defend it now. He paused. The question is whether you want to fight this battle alone or whether you're ready to accept support. Victoria looked at him, at Emma, at this unexpected pair who had shown her more genuine kindness in a few hours than she had received in years. I don't know how to accept help, she admitted. I've been doing everything alone for so long. That's okay, Emma said, patting her hand. Daddy can teach you. He's really good at helping. He helped us fix my bicycle and my broken heart when Mommy went to heaven, and now he fixed the airplane too. Victoria laughed despite everything. A real laugh, wet with tears but genuine. Maybe I could use some lessons. 6 months later. The conference room on the 47th floor of Crane Technologies had a new photograph on the wall. Not awards or magazine covers, just a simple frame picture of a ribbon-cutting ceremony, the Rachel Cole Foundation. Victoria had won the battle against Richard. It hadn't been simple, but it had been decisive. When she returned to New York, she discovered Richard had been secretly meeting with competitors, preparing to orchestrate a hostile takeover using proxies on the board. Armed with evidence Marcus helped her compile during that long night in Ireland, she had exposed his scheme to the full board. The vote wasn't even close. Richard was removed, faced criminal charges for breach of fiduciary duty, and Victoria emerged with majority control of her own company for the first time in its history. The IPO had succeeded beyond projections, but none of that was why she smiled when she looked at that photograph. The picture showed Victoria, Marcus, and Emma standing in front of a modest storefront, the foundation's first office. Its mission, helping families overwhelmed by medical debt, giving them what Rachel never had, a fighting chance. Victoria's phone buzzed. a text with a hand-drawn image attached, Emma's latest artwork, an airplane with 3 passengers visible through the windows. Labels identified them: Daddy Emma and Miss Victoria. Below the drawing, in careful 7-year-old handwriting, "Come to my school play tomorrow. I'm playing the little airplane who flies with her heart." Please, please, please. Victoria cleared her schedule. She had learned to do that now, to make room for things that mattered. The company was still successful, but she had changed how she led it. Work-life balance wasn't just a policy anymore. It was a practice. She still worked hard, still drove for excellence, but she had stopped measuring her worth solely in stock prices and started measuring it in moments that couldn't be quantified. Dinners with the Coles on Sunday evenings, Emma's excited calls when she aced a spelling test, Marcus's quiet presence, steady and grounding. Nothing was official between them. No labels, no expectations. Just a growing understanding that some people are meant to walk alongside you, and wisdom lies in letting them. The school auditorium was packed with parents clutching cameras and grandparents dabbing at eyes. Victoria sat in the 5th row, having flown economy for the first time in a decade. The middle seat hadn't even bothered her. On stage, 2nd graders in homemade costumes told the story of a little airplane who was smaller than all the others. The other planes laughed at her. They said she would never fly high enough, never be good enough. But the little airplane didn't give up. She learned that flying wasn't about having the biggest engines or the sleekest design. It was about having the biggest heart. Emma delivered her final line with perfect conviction. And the little airplane flew higher than anyone thought possible, because she discovered the secret. You don't fly alone. You fly by lifting others up and letting them lift you. The audience erupted in applause. Later, in the cafeteria decorated with paper streamers and serving store-bought cookies, Emma dragged Victoria through the crowd. "This is Miss Victoria," she announced to her friends. "She's our special friend. She used to think flying solo was best, but now she knows better." The children laughed. Victoria laughed too. A real laugh. The kind she had almost forgotten existed. Marcus appeared with 2 cups of fruit punch. "She insisted on introducing you to everyone," he said apologetically. "I tried to warn her that CEOs don't usually attend elementary school plays." "This CEO does." Victoria accepted the punch. "This CEO is exactly where she wants to be." They stood together, watching Emma demonstrate the proper way to dip cookies in juice to a group of fascinated classmates. "Thank you," Victoria said quietly. "For what?" "For that day on the plane. Not just for saving my life, for showing me what I was missing, what I had become." She paused. "For offering me a place at the table when I deserved to eat alone." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Rachel used to say that everyone deserves grace, that people aren't defined by their worst moments. They're defined by what they choose to do next." "She sounds like she was extraordinary." "She was," he smiled. "She would have liked you, would have said you just needed someone to remind you that success isn't about accumulating the most. It's about meaning something to someone." Emma came running over, cookie crumbs on her chin and joy in her eyes. "Daddy, can Miss Victoria come to Sunday dinner? I want to teach her how to make the airplane models. She needs to learn because her apartment doesn't have any, and that's really sad." Marcus looked at Victoria. "Would you like to?" Victoria thought about her penthouse, the designer furniture, the silence. Then she thought about a small apartment in Queens, model airplanes on windowsills, drawings on the refrigerator, Sunday dinners that lasted for hours because no one wanted them to end. "I would love to." Emma grabbed her hand, small fingers interlacing with perfectly manicured ones. "Come on, Daddy makes the best spaghetti. And after dinner, we can work on the new model. It's an F-22 like Daddy used to fly. I'll show you how the wings work. As they walked out together, Emma between them, Victoria caught her reflection in the school's glass doors. She looked different, not the isolated executive who commanded everything but connected with nothing. Just a woman who had finally understood what mattered. The drive back to the city took longer than necessary because Emma insisted on pointing out every airplane in the sky. Each sighting required a detailed analysis of probable aircraft type, altitude, and destination. Victoria had never found commercial aviation so fascinating. At a stoplight, Marcus glanced over at her. You know, that day on the plane, when you made those comments, I'm so sorry about that. I was, let me finish. His voice was gentle. That day, I felt a flash of anger for about 3 seconds. Then I thought about what Rachel always taught me, that people lash out when they're wounded, that cruelty usually grows from pain, not power. Victoria was quiet. I spent years learning to look past surfaces, Marcus continued. Military training teaches you to assess situations, read people, find the truth beneath the noise. That day I saw someone who was afraid, protecting herself the only way she knew how. You saw all that in 3 seconds? I saw someone who deserved understanding. He shrugged. I just didn't expect to get the chance to offer it. The light changed. They drove on. Marcus, yeah? What would Rachel say about all of this? About me being part of your lives? He was quiet for a moment, considering. She would say that broken things can become beautiful when you give them a chance to heal, and that the best thing any of us can do is offer that chance to others. In the back seat, Emma had fallen asleep, her head resting against the window, her hand still clutching a cookie. Victoria looked at her, at Marcus, at this unexpected family that had welcomed her without conditions. I spent 34 years climbing to the top of everything, she said softly. But I never realized the view means nothing if there's no one to share it with. Marcus reached over and squeezed her hand. Just once. Brief but warm. Welcome to solid ground, he said. The company's pretty good down here. Epilogue. The annual gala for the Rachel Cole Foundation drew donors from across the country. Victoria had transformed it from a modest charity into a national movement, leveraging her business skills for something more meaningful than profit margins. But the highlight of the evening wasn't the speeches or the fundraising. It was Emma, now 8 years old, standing on stage with a giant cardboard check representing the foundation's first $1 million in aid distributed. My mommy got sick, Emma said into the microphone, her voice clear and confident, and it cost a lot of money. My daddy sold everything to try to help her, but she still went to heaven. The ballroom was silent. Miss Victoria started this foundation because she wanted other families to have help when they need it. She used to be kind of lonely and scared of people, but now she's not because she has us. Laughter rippled through the crowd. My mommy used to say that the outside of a person doesn't show what's inside, and my daddy says that everyone is carrying something heavy, and the lucky ones find someone to help them carry it. Emma looked at Victoria in the front row, then at Marcus beside her. I used to just have daddy. Now I have daddy and Miss Victoria. And I think that's what mommy wanted all along, for us to find more people to love. She beamed at the audience. Also, the little airplanes with the biggest hearts fly the highest. Just so you know. Standing ovation. Victoria wiped her eyes. Marcus put his arm around her shoulders. After the gala, as they walked to the car, Emma between them holding both their hands, Victoria looked up at the stars. Do you think Rachel is watching? I know she is, Marcus said. What do you think she's saying? He smiled, that quiet smile that had become Victoria's favorite sight in the world. She's saying it took us long enough to figure out what she knew all along, that the best flights aren't the ones that take you somewhere new. They're the ones that bring you home. Victoria squeezed Emma's hand. Somewhere above them, a plane traced lights across the darkness, carrying 200 strangers toward their own stories, their own chances, their own opportunities to become more than they were. Victoria Crane had spent her life building empires, but standing there in a parking lot, holding hands with a former fighter pilot and his extraordinary daughter, she finally understood. The only empire worth building is one made of people who matter. Everything else is just altitude without destination, just engines without heart, just flying without ever really going anywhere at all.